And now, at this time, to introduce Mr. Jim Kettner, who's being inducted this evening, please welcome his good friend, Mr. Pat Kenney, Simon Diamond.
Heard that music in like 10 years. I met Jim Kettner in 1991. And back in 1991, Jim would come with me to whatever show I was wrestling on, and I would do all the driving, and Jim would do all the sleeping. I would pay for all the tolls and gas. I'd wrestle, lose money, drive home, Jim would sleep, I'd pay for all the tolls and gas. Today, some 18 years later, I did all the driving, Jim did all the sleeping, I paid for all the gas, tolls, and I made no money. So some things never change. I don't know if everyone has seen Jim. He's lost a lot of weight. And as a matter of fact, people have come over and mentioned, said, Jim, you know, you look great, you've lost a lot of weight, it looks like your clothes are falling off of you, but what are you going to do with your clothes? And I said, I'm going to give them to my son. My son's not even born yet. You know, we've had a lot of great speeches. A couple of the early people said, you know, I have a fear of talking, I have a panic disorder. Some people talked about, you know, crowds and stuff, and this is all very serious stuff. I too have a disorder. It's called loud and obnoxious. Okay, now my jokes are out of the way. You know, serious stuff. Jim started wrestling in 1967. I wasn't even born yet, as neither were most of you. He started it and he founded the ECWA mostly because he had a love, genuine love of professional wrestling like everyone here. It began as a small little promotion in Delaware, which he would raise funds, $10,000 annually for boys clubs, YMCAs, and anyone else who needed money back then in Delaware, which was a lot of people. He wrestled from 1967 to 1995, New Jersey, Maryland, West Virginia, Delaware. And I think a lot of Jim's acclaim came after his wrestling career ended as a promoter, but I think that it should be noted that Jim was a very good wrestler in the ring. Lord knows if you look at him, you would never think that. His true claim to fame came as a promoter, and his crowning jewel was the Super 8, which he began in 1997. To this current day, the names have read like a who's who of professional wrestling. Billy Kidman, AJ Styles, Matt and Jeff Hardy, the late Steve Bradley, Bryan Danielson, Charlie and Russ Haas, Low Key, Christian, and Simon Diamond, that's me. In 1992, Jim began promoting for the WWE, their live events, which is something that he never really made public because Jim was never a self-promoter. And in the wonderful world of independent wrestling, like we all know, it's filled with a lot of self-promoters. One of Jim's biggest problems is he's never willing to tote his flag, so that's why a lot of people never really heard of Jim Kettner. While most promoters tell you that they drew 2,000 fans when they only drew 200, Jim Kettner drew 800 and then told you that he drew 800, which is very rare. One of the best things about Jim is, again, in the world of independent wrestling where people have promoters have phrases like, I got television. We're gonna have pay-per-view. We're gonna be running house shows. Jim never said that. Jim would say, come wrestle on my show and I'll help you. And think about that. How many times in the wrestling business did you ever hear anyone say, I'll help you? Because the majority of the people, they want to take and take and take. And Jim wanted to give and give and give. And if you, I look around, I see a lot of different people who wrestled for Jim, and if you ask them, they'll tell you the same thing. Jim Kettner, he never took from the wrestling business. He always gave. He opened up WrestleTech in 1997 and ran that to 2003, where he trained the likes of Charlie and Russ Haas and Simon Diamond, that's me. I had asked Jim before I came up here, I said, should I talk about myself? And Jim said, hell no, we'll be here for 3 days. And then he said, and everyone will be sleeping by the first day. The ECWA grew and grew and grew. Unfortunately, Jim did not. The greatest attribute that Jim Kettner always had was he was a mentor. He just wasn't a promoter. He just wasn't a guy that you went to once a month and wrestled for. He was a guy that you called for advice. I can honestly say that I never signed a contract. I never made a move in the wrestling business until after I talked to Jim. That's how much faith I had. And if you ask a lot of the guys that he mentored, guys like Christian, guys like Low Key, guys like Test, guys like the Haasses, guys like me, AJ Styles, Brian Danielson. The list is endless. And long before they ever signed a contract, made a dime in the business, Jim looked at them and said, this guy has it. And I was lucky because Jim took me in into a part of his inner circle, which there's only like maybe 2 or 3 guys in, I think. And Jim brought me in, and so I used to go to shows where Jim would be looking at the quote-unquote next independent sensation, which we all know there's been thousands of independent sensations through the years. And when Jim would go to look at these guys, I would go there and I would stay next to Jim, and the guy would walk out and Jim would watch him, and then they'd go and he'd lock up and he'd turn to me and say, I'm going to the concession stand, you want anything? I want anything? I thought you came to look at this guy. And said, I've already seen enough. He can't lock up, he certainly can't work. But that was his genius. Jim is old school. And in a world of current wrestling where the term old school is thrown around so liberally, sorry Steve Carino, Jim stands for something more than just an old school philosophy and old school traditions. Jim believes in the wrestling business, the old school way, where you shook a person's hand and you said, you're winning the title, and you won the title. Where you shook someone's hand and said, you're going to be here from July 94 to July 96, and guess what? You were there. That's the old school tradition that Jim Kettner believes in. That's the old school tradition that Jim Kettner stands for. It's very rare in a world of independent wrestling where someone is not a self-promoter, where someone actually has integrity, where someone actually functions with morals, and where someone actually stands for something that is against the grain of what it is, and that's being a self-promoter. All Jim ever wanted was to see his guys make it, because that was the pride that he took in the business. That's old school. I can honestly tell you this, and I've said it quite a few times, and it may rub people the wrong way, but I don't care. I had the luxury of working for Paul Heyman in ECW. I had the luxury of working with Vince Russo in TNA. And I can honestly tell you that Jim Kettner was and is the smartest guy I've ever met in the wrestling business. And I'm not lying, I'm not saying that because he's sitting there. The way that he would start an angle, shape it, and end it, and both guys would leave better than when the angle started, was pure genius. I've often heard people say, you know, it's a shame that guy never made it. It's a shame this indie guy never made it. The true injustice of the wrestling business is the fact that Jim Kettner never got a real chance to ply his trade on national television. It's my honor to induct him into the 2009 New England Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank Joe Bruin and the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame for this honor. It's also an honor to be inducted today along some longtime friends, Bobby Rydell, my fellow promoter Sheldon Goldberg, and the late Steve Bradley. And I would be remiss if I didn't thank Simon Diamond. Out of everyone I've helped over the years and trained, I think I'm the most proud of him. It is true that we would drive to practice. I would make him drive and I would sleep. We would drive home from practice. I would make him drive and I would sleep. But I'll never forget the first time he went into the ring to wrestle in front of a live crowd. He went in and wrestled and I went to sleep. Thank you very much.